Chapter 12. The chapter about self. One should guard oneself well. Prince Bodhi invited the Buddha for the first meal in his new palace and put down cloth, thinking if the Buddha stepped on it, he would be blessed with children. The Buddha refused to walk on it and explained that Prince Bodhi would be without children because of a past life in which he failed to protect himself by keeping precepts during any of the 3 periods of his life. And then he gave the teaching in this verse. 157. If one regards oneself as dear, one should guard oneself well. During one of 3 watches of the night, the wise person should stay alert. Only the wise should advise. Venerable Upananda preached well, but was a greedy monk who always took the biggest offering. One day he swindled 2 monks out of a blanket, and the Buddha explained that one should train oneself before preaching to others, and summarized his teaching with this verse. 158. First, one should establish oneself in what is suitable. Then one can advise another. The wise one should not have any defilement. Train another only when well trained oneself. Venerable Patandika Tissa took 500 monks with him and went to the forest. At night he urged them 3 times to put forth effort, but he himself went to sleep. The monks, being worn out, made no progress. The Buddha spoke this verse about the elder. 159. He should do as he would advise another to do. Then being well trained, he could train another. For self is difficult to train. The self, when trained, is a true friend. A woman took ordination unaware that she was pregnant. When the child was born, King Pasenadi offered to bring him up, and he became known as Kumara Kassapa. Later he ordained and became an arhat. He also helped his mother give up her affection for him and attain insight. The Buddha then spoke this verse. 160. For the self is the friend of self. For what other friend would there be? When the self has been well trained, one finds a friend that is hard to find. Wickedness arises from oneself. The householder Mahakala listened to an all-night Dhamma teaching at Jetavana, but in the morning was beaten to death by people who mistook him for a thief. The Buddha explained that he had caused the unjust death of another in a previous life, and his bad deed had caught up with him, and gave the teaching in this verse. 161. That wickedness done by oneself, born and arising in oneself, crushes the one who is stupid, as diamond a rock jewel. A lack of virtue is worse than an enemy. Devadatta sought to kill the Buddha and take over the running of the Sangha. The Buddha explained that he also tried to kill him in other existences, but it all worked to Devadatta's downfall. And then he spoke this verse about him. 162. The one who lacks virtue, like deadly creeper on tree, makes himself just as his foe wishes him to be. Good is hard to do. Devadatta caused a split in the Sangha and informed Venerable Ānanda, who related it to the Buddha. The Buddha explained how easy it is to do what is wrong and summarized the teaching with this verse. 163. Easily done are things not good, unbeneficial for oneself. But that which is beneficial is exceedingly hard to do. Reviling the noble bears unpleasant fruit. Venerable Kala was a good preacher, but sought to prevent his supporter from listening to the Buddha, thinking she would abandon him. She went to listen anyway, and he followed her, thinking to persuade the Buddha not to teach deep teachings to her. The Buddha rebuked him and spoke this verse. 164. Whoever reviles the worthy teaching of the noble ones who live by Dhamma, that stupid one, depending on wrong views, like the bamboo when it bears fruit, brings about his own destruction. Purity and impurity come from oneself. The householder Kula Kala listened to an all-night Dhamma preaching at Jetavana, but in the morning was beaten by people who mistook him for a thief. Some courtesans interceded and they let him go. This was reported to the Buddha, who gave the teaching in this verse. 165. By self is a wicked deed done. By self is one defiled. By self is a wicked deed left undone. By oneself is one purified. Purity and impurity come from oneself, for no one can purify another person. Do not neglect one's own good. When Venerable Attadatta heard the Buddha declare his intention to finally pass away in 4 months' time, rather than attend on the Buddha, he went to the forest to practice the teaching. The Buddha lauded him and said, "This is how one truly honors him," and spoke this verse. 166. One should not neglect one's own good for another's, however great. Knowing what is good for oneself, one should be intent on that good.